I'm here in San Antonio for NAREIT's REITwise, our 2019 Law, Accounting, and Finance Conference. Joining me today is Joanne Monderas, Director of SEC Reporting and Policies with Regency Centers Corporation. Joanne, thanks so much for joining us.
Certainly.
Now, what do you think is the most important thing that REITs need to keep in mind regarding the LIBOR and SOFR transition?
Well, there's a couple of key things that we're seeing as this evolves. We know we still have a couple of years remaining, but what we're hearing at this point as the details are being worked through is that there's a little more volatility with SOFR than what we're used to with LIBOR. I think those issues are trying to be resolved, and we've got a couple of years. It sounds like 2022 is what we're dealing with. So for REITs right now, what we need to be focused on is looking at our debt agreements, looking at our interest rate swap agreements, and understanding what the fallback language is around the alternate interest rates when LIBOR is no longer an option.
And regarding the new lease accounting standards, what will be the biggest changes that REITs must take into account?
Well, surprisingly, there are actually a lot of changes that we're seeing as REITs from a lessor perspective. As we know, the headline news was the main goal of this standard was, from a lessee perspective, to get the lease obligation on the balance sheet and then an asset. But from a lessor perspective, we're seeing a lot of changes. And one of the biggest items that I think will impact the users of our financial statements is the presentation will provide less transparency into the historic lines of revenue that we used to be able to provide. So that's one big item. The second item that'll be more of a prospective item is that we'll have to be looking at the classification of our leases that we sign with our tenants. It's no longer a default to be an operating lease. We might have some of our longer term leases that become a sales type, and we're basically recognizing a gain on sale immediately and then just interest income over the life. So that's something that we'll be working through and we'll have to watch out for going forward.
And lastly, are there any other SEC hot topics that REITs or their shareholders should be mindful of in the near term?
You know, I think related to the leasing standard, the SEC is always concerned about the way companies present themselves to the investors and provide a balanced picture. Now, with the leasing standard, there's a little less transparency at first glance around the various forms of income from the leases. So we as preparers will have to find the right balance in complying with GAAP while still providing what our investors need. So I think the SEC will be keeping an eye on how we present that information. And you know, they're always concerned about non-GAAP disclosures to make sure we're complying with the non-GAAP disclosures if it goes that far, while still providing investors what they need.
Joanne, thank you so much for joining us.
Certainly, thanks for having me.
For more information on this and other REIT news and analysis, be sure to visit NAREIT's website, REIT.com.